Okay, so this is my week two, day one video, where we're going to take a look at retirement savings, which I know is a very far off topic for a lot of you. Most of you don't have jobs yet, or you've, just started your first job recently. Um, but we're going to take a look at what is the one rule that, or the one tip that you could do for your future financially. That's my terrible idea of doing a BuzzFeed title for this. Anyway, so go ahead and go out to the Desmos activity, log in with Google using your student account, and just hit go. Okay, so for the first thing I want you to do is just check in. What's new? Tell me, share with me something interesting that's happened to you, something positive. We can all use a little bit of positivity here. Something funny, happy, or funny, or something else. And feel free to sketch a picture of what happened. I'm going to share with you guys, actually, a story. Today, I walked into the kitchen and found my son pushing uh, my daughter around on a toy hippo. It was adorable. I should show you pictures of it. In fact, you know what? I will. Okay, anyway, technical difficulties, and also I realized that my daughter wasn't wearing pants in that video. Sorry, guys. And anyway, I hope everyone's doing well. Um, Also, you'll notice my picture is not showing up in the corner here. I will be speaking, but it is a little bit late, and I'm afraid for what my appearance looks like right now. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. Let's go ahead and get into this. So, first thing I'm going to have you guys do is watch this video about planning for retirement. It's pretty short, 3 minutes. It's the only video. I had some feedback saying, be light on the videos, please. So go ahead, watch it. I will pause the screen. Come back when you're done. Okay, so now that I've paused for about 5 seconds, yeah, let's talk about retirement. So most people, right? Like we all hope that someday we can quit working and go enjoy our lives doing whatever else we want to do. And as you saw in the video, there's kind of a new trend of younger people these days trying to plan ahead so that they can reach that stage in their lives earlier. Um, it's a really cool thing if you're able to do it, and a lot of people are, and a lot of people aren't. So, just some questions for you to consider here. At what age do you plan to retire? Um, and how much money do you think you would need to live the rest of your life without working? So, for me, personally, I hope to retire in my 50s. I really don't want to be working. Most people retire. I think the average age of retirement is about 63. Um, Maybe I'll say my late 50s. Um, Before I'm too old to enjoy, the things that I really want to do. How much money do I need to actually do that? That's a really good question. So, and that's going to depend on everyone. For me personally, I don't know. I mean, assuming that I've got sort of my house paid off, my car paid off, um, I've paid off all of my student loans, which I haven't yet. Um, Basic expenses. I mean, I'm not really sure, but maybe, I don't know, let's just say $500,000, $1 million would be enough to comfortably sustain me and make sure that I can pay all my medical bills, etc. I'm not sure, you know. And what are some strategies that other people use to prepare for retirement? Well, people typically budget. Um, People set budgets for what they can be spending each month or each year, um, to make sure that they're saving enough money. And the sad part of this is that a lot of people don't do that. Um, but what are your thoughts? Go ahead and tell me how you feel. All right, so here's our dude, right? That was on the kind of cover page. Um, there's an article here that I've linked. It's fairly long, but it's interesting. It's from the New York Times, and it describes an automatic retirement savings program proposed by this guy, Senator Biss of Illinois, and it would be the first such program in the entire nation. When the article was written, it actually is the first of its type in the nation. It exists today. Just started a couple of years ago. And the reason for, go ahead and feel free, please read the article. It's interesting. But the reason for this program is basically, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 85% of Americans who work full time at kind of larger employers, they have access to a retirement plan, and so they're actively, planning to save enough money for retirement. However, at smaller employers, only about half of the workers save, and so there's a lack of access to kind of retirement savings plans. Not enough people are actually doing it, and even overall, only 52% of households who are kind of in this retirement age bracket, so roughly half of all households, even had a retirement account, a 401k. There's various types of retirement accounts. I'm not going to get into that. There's all sorts, 401ks, IRAs, Roth versions of both of those. But even those, so only half of the people who are kind of getting ready for retirement had planned ahead of time to save enough money for it. And even those who did have one, the median balance, sort of almost the average balance in those accounts, was only $111,000. So compare that to what you had said in the previous screen. Is that enough? To me, it's not. It's not. It's really a sad case that not everyone is making sure that they will be able to retire, and so a lot of people end up working, well into their older ages, even if they can. So I kind of knew this ahead of time. I'm not surprised by this. But tell me how what do you think? How does this compare to you, to what you thought? Um, not everyone has the ability to plan for their retirement. And unfortunately, many people have to rely on family, or their family, or, really the state, the federal government, to provide Social Security. Um, and I wish I had some statistics here. The federal government, Social Security, does not pay a whole lot, and people don't realize that. I think the average payment is only about $15,000 a year, for people who are, over 65. And even that keeps getting pushed back. I think now it's 67 and a half. Um, so, it's really not something that people can or should be relying on. Um, so what he's proposing, what he's trying to do here is make sure that everyone is automatically enrolled in some sort of retirement savings program so that they can be secure. And it's really, I think it's a worthwhile cause, but it depends. So, how can someone like you possibly save enough money for a comfortable retirement? I mean, like for example, for me, I said $500,000. That's probably what I'll need, maybe more. That's a lot of money. How could we possibly get to something like that? Um, who's going to be saving away that much money each year? Well, it turns out that the answer to that question is compound interest. Um, that you don't really need to be. I don't need to have made $500,000 or $1,000,000 in order to have that much later in life. Instead, I can just put away a small amount, and over time, if I put it into an account that earns interest, then that interest will build on itself, and generate a large amount of money by the time I retire. So let's consider a simple example here. I tried to copy this picture here. So suppose you had $100 and you put it into a savings account that earns an amazing 50% interest annually. So at the end of the year, whatever amount you had in that account, the bank or the financial institution that you hold it in says, we'll pay you 50% for letting us borrow your money for the year. How much will be in the account after 10 years? After 20 years? Take a guess. I'm going to pause the video. You should pause it too. See if you can take a guess how much that would be. All right, so I'm going to take a guess myself. Not having done the math yet, let's just say, I mean, we're only starting with $100, but 50% is a lot. So, like, I know that in year two, I'll have 150, and then in year three, I'm going to get 50% of that. So I'm going to get $50 on my initial amount. I don't know. Let's just say I think it's going to build kind of crazy though. I'll say that $100 will turn into, I don't know, 5,000 um, in 10 years. Maybe, I don't know. Let's take a guess and say 10,000 in 20 years. I mean, we're starting off really small. Again, this is just a guess. But now let's break it down. So let's say that you've got $100 in your account. You're getting 50% interest, so we're going to multiply that by 1.5, 1.50, and we'll have $150 in the account in the second year, or at the end of the first year. And now we're going to get 50% on top of that. So one way we could think about this is it's going to be 150 times 1.5, which would be, it looks like I'm saying here is 225. If you want to check, you can always click on this scientific calculator and you can plug in some numbers. Let's say 150 times 1.5. Put this in like that. And yeah, okay, that's 225. And now for the next year, I make a good point here. I want to point out. So in the first year, we're making $50, and then in the next year, we're actually making more than $50. We're making 75 because we're earning interest on the interest that we already earned. So here we gained $50, and then here we're earning 50% on top of that $50. So every year we're kind of building on the free interest, the free money that the financial institution is giving you. Let me pause the video. See if you can go ahead and come up with, fill in this table, and then come up with a general formula for how much is in the account after T years. So go ahead. I'll wait. I forgot to put up my pause screen. It's all good. Okay. So hopefully you've paused and are coming back. Let's fill this in. Let's see. So if we've got 225, multiply that, gain 30% on top of that. It looks like we're now at 337.50. And then in the next year, we could take that. Every year, we're going to be multiplying by this amount, right? So now we've got $506.25. And then we're going to take that for the next year, multiply it by 1.50. Now we're getting a little higher. Round this to $759.38. 37.5 cents. We'll round it up to 38. So that's after 5 years. How do I jump over to 10? Well, another way to think about this is that we started with $100 and we multiplied it by 1.50. It's a 50% increase. At first we did it to the 1 year. And then after that, we took that amount and did it again. So we just kind of multiplied it by this 50% increase twice to get to the second year. And if we did this, we could do it again and again. We could say, okay, in the third year, it's 337. In the fourth year, it's 506. Fifth year, we should get something that matches what we had calculated. So in the 10th year, suddenly it looks like we're up to $5,766.50, which seems like a huge jump from the $50 we were making in year one. I'm actually a little surprised that my guess of 5,000 was pretty close. What about in 20 years? I said, I don't know, 10,000. Let's see, what would this be like in 20 years? I think I need a comment here. $332,525.67. That seems enormous, right? Like we started with $100 and we haven't changed anything. We haven't added anything else. We've just been growing at this exponential rate. And now we're up to 300,000. Now, this is not kind of like real because no financial institution out there offers a 50% annually interest rate. But you can see that there is kind of this enormous growth potential here. What would be a general formula? Well, in general, we're saying that you're going to have $100. You're going to start with $100. You're going to increase it by 50% every year for however many years, right? So let me this math ability to type math in here, and I'll copy this in. So I'll say for t years, this is where we're going to get our function a of t. The amount in the account after t years as a function is 100 times 1.50 to the t, to the power of t. Years. Okay, so let's take a look. I said that's not really a realistic example. Let's take a look at something that is more realistic. And we'll see that even with more modest interest rates, so something that is realistic, the power of compounding is enormous given enough time. On the next screen, we can play around with the basic variables in this calculation, such as how much a person first initially puts into the account, called the principal, some financial terms here, at what rate the account accrues interest, the interest rate. So this was our 50% before. And how long the money will be invested in the account. So like how long will it sit there? Try out some different scenarios and try to figure out like how much would be in the account after 20 years if we had, say, an initial investment of $1,000 or $5,000. What if we change the interest rate? How does that affect things? If it's 7% a year, 10% or 15%, what if the money stays invested for 30 years or 40 years? Um, how much will you have, and what factor has the biggest impact on the account balance, the total amount at the end? Is it the principal, the amount you started with? Is it the interest rate? Is it the time invested? So go ahead, go to the next screen and play around. Play around with those things. So I've set up a graph here, a model that hopefully you can see. If you need to, you can kind of zoom it out a little bit, or you can scroll in with your mouse, move it around. And I've kind of laid out, P is the principal amount. We're going to start with $1,000. R is the interest rate. We're starting at 0.07 or 7%. The green graph will show the account balance compounding at this annual interest rate over a number of years. And you can kind of drag this around to see it. This is after 20 years. What's the value of the account? So play around. I'm going to pause the screen. See what does it look like? Can we get up to maybe my goal of 500,000 or whatever your goal you said you thought would that you think you need to retire? Okay, so I'm going to continue here. Let's see. I mean, if I play around, it looks like starting with these basic things: $1,000, 7%, very much smaller than 50, right? That's a more modest but realistic interest rate that you can find on certain mutual funds or index funds, things like that. Things that just follow the market. And this is out 20 years. You're growing your $1,000. It looks like into just shy of $4,000, and that's over 20 years. That doesn't seem too crazy. But on the other hand, I mean, you're just, saving it away. Maybe you don't need the $1,000, so you can let it sit there for 20 years and basically grow to 4 times that amount for doing nothing. What happens if we change the principal amount? Say we go up to $5,000. Well, now it looks like after not changing anything else, after 20 years, we're up to $19,000. So again, we've basically quadrupled the initial investment. You can play around with this. Whatever you set it to, it basically does it will get to about 4 times that amount. So it has an impact, right? The more you can save, the better. The more you'll earn. But it's about the same percentage-wise. What if we change the interest rate? How does that affect things? Well, if we go lower, you're really not saving a whole lot. I'll tell you, most banks nowadays, they used to offer 5% at least. Now they offer about 0.0, basically nothing. But if you can get something up to 8, 9, 10, you can see that this curve starts to rise very quickly. It's very sensitive to these annual percentage increases, these annual interest rates. If you could get something up to 15%, suddenly, your $2,000 or whatever your $1,000 you started with isn't just quadrupling, it's being multiplied by 16 times. If you had 10,000 you could put in, you're multiplying that initial investment by 16 times over 20 years. So this has a pretty large effect. What if we stuck with 7%, and we kind of went out further in time? So this is kind of like, how long are you willing to let the investment, your savings, sit there? Does time matter? Or is it just a matter of interest rates? Well, let's say you can get something up to 10% interest. If you kind of follow this curve, what it shows is that not a lot is happening early on. But if you can wait 30 years, then the difference between 20 years and 30 years in this example is showing growing from $33,000 to $87,000. And if we go out to 40 years, you're at $226,000. And as you can see from this curve, it's really not doing a whole lot. You're not gaining a whole lot. Basically nothing in the first 10, maybe even 20 years. All of this growth happens later. Kind of flatten this a little bit. I guess I can leave it here. All of the growth happens there's a huge amount of growth in these last 10 years, say between 30 and 40, compared to the growth before. So time, how long you can kind of get this started and let it sit there, has a huge effect on how much you'll end up with. So let's play through some scenarios here. And it looks like I need to fix something because there's no inputs here. Give me a second. Okay, so I've jumped back into this scenario 1. See if you can figure out, if you can calculate this. How much would someone earn or how much would someone have if they saved $5,000 as their principal, as their initial investment, um, at an 8% interest rate after 10 years? Go ahead and see if you can figure that out. Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video, you've tried this on your own. I'm going to work through it too here, so I'm going to grab the calculator. And I'm going to say, okay, well, $5,000 times, if we're earning 8% interest, we're going to multiply this by 1.08. And we're going to do that every year. So after 10 years, we're going to raise that to the power of 10. And it looks like we will end up with, I'm going to put some math in here, about $10,794. So look a little nicer. So $5,000, earning 8% interest after 10 years, basically doubled it. And hopefully, now that I've fixed this, my previous answers might not be in there, but this one will be. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Scenario 2. How much will someone who saves $5,000 at 8%, so same interest rate, same initial investment, but now we're going to wait 30 years. Go ahead and calculate that and see what you come up with. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead too and say, let me plug this in again. $5,000 initial investment of 1.08, increasing at 8% interest every year for 30 years. How much do we have now? So at 10 years, we doubled. At 30 years, we're up to $50,000. So a bit more significant than just doubling. We've basically gotten 10 times our money now. So after in the first 10 years, we doubled. In the next 20, we multiplied our initial investment by 10 times 10, which is amazing. It scales, right? Like if we had $50,000 in here, this would be $500,000 if we could wait 30 years. So time is the biggest thing here. Like I said, that's the reason why, this is how you can get up to whatever amount you think you might need later in life if you start early, which is a pretty important lesson, I think. Now we're gonna make this thing a little bit more complicated. We're gonna add in the impact of regular deposits. So normally, people don't just invest $5,000 one time. Instead, they'll make regular deposits maybe each year, or in the example of the Illinois Automatic Retirement Plan, employees would be enrolled to contribute 3% of their paycheck. So a small amount of their pay, every paycheck, would go into whatever this savings account is for their retirement. So how do we take into account several payments, right? Again, we'll try to simplify this a little bit. Let's say that we're just investing one time at the end of the year, each year. Well, we can simply treat each of those deposits as an initial and principal amount, that it accumulates interest, compounded interest each year on its own. So then the entire amount, the entire total of the account, is going to be the sum of each of those individual principals principal investments. So for example, if someone saves $5,000 each year for 3 years at 8%, then after 10 years from the time they started, from the first time they put that $5,000 in, it will have compounded 10 times, right? So their first $5,000 will compound 10 times and will be worth 5,000 times, 1.08 to the power of 10. Well, what about the $5,000 they put in the next year? That's going to have 9 years worth of compounding at this point in time, right? At 10 years after they started. So the second deposit is basically the same thing. It's just gotten 1 year less time to kind of accumulate, to compound. And then the third $5,000, if they did this for 3 years, the third deposit would compound 7 times in the same amount of time that this first one will compound 10 times, right? So we can just add up all of these. We can treat them separately and add them together to find out what is the total amount that they will have saved. Let's calculate this. So go ahead, put this in your calculator and see, what you get. Okay, so let me go ahead and do this myself. And I could just copy and paste, I think. This should work. So here's the first $5,000, right? After 10 years, it's 10,000, almost 10,800. Let me see. So this is the first $5,000, 10,794, because it's compounding 10 times. What about the second deposit that they make? In year 2, they deposit another $5,000. So that has 9 years to compound. And that gets up to, let me see, the first deposit is this. Second deposit is now compounded 9 times and is up to this amount, close to 10,000. A little bit less because it hasn't had as much time to grow. It's had 1 year less to grow. And the third deposit has 7 years to grow. Wait, this is a mistake. It should be 8 years, right? It's gotten one less year to grow. So the first one grows for 10 years, the second one grows for 9 years, the third one grows for 8 years. My bad, typos in there. And so 1 year less, it's gotten to be up. It's still pretty good, it's still getting up there. It's about just over 9,000. There are my dollar signs here. And in total, how much is there then? Well, we can kind of add these together. So let's say we've got this plus this plus that. So in total, we've made is worth. We kind of write this on a separate line. Add up these 3 deposits kind of separately, about $30,000. Not bad considering they've basically put in 15,000 of their own money, they're only waiting about 10 years, and it will basically double. But this is how we can kind of consider this impact of regular deposits, of separate deposits over time. On this next screen, we've got an interesting comparison here. So I found this online, kind of searching through different infographics about compound interest. And it really hits to the point of compare these two investors. Investor 1 starts saving at age 25. She sets aside $5,000 a year for 10 years in a row. And then she makes no more payments. She doesn't save anything else after those first 10 years. Compare her to investor 2, who starts saving 10 years later at age 35, also invests $5,000 a year, but invests for the next 30 years. Who has more money by age 65? And it turns out, according to this infographic, that investor 1 will have far greater in her account just from having started earlier. So keep in mind, they're saving the same amount each year, $5,000 a year. She's saving for 10 years and then not saving anymore. And he's saving for the next 30 years. And she still has more. Is this true? Could this possibly be true? If so, how? How is that possible? Because it kind of like doesn't seem logical. Go ahead and see if you can kind of rack your brain about this. Remember that they're making separate deposits, so she's making 10 deposits, and assume an interest rate of 8%. Again, it's a pretty standard assumption. The market grows about 8% a year, as an average over time, over a long period of time. See if this makes sense to you. I'm going to pause it. Feel free to pause the video now, and I'll come back in a few. Okay, so let's dig into this. Is this true? That simply starting 10 years earlier means you can stop saving and have more than someone who saves for the next 30 years? Well, let's see. How much will the person on the left, investor 1, set aside here? How much will they make? So they're making 10 payments, right? The first payment is going to be $5,000. It's going to be allowed to grow at this 8% for, let's see, 25 to 65. That's 40 years. It's gotten 40 years worth of compounding. So it's worth this much, 108,000 by the time she's 65. And then she's setting aside $5,000 a year for the next 10 years. So her next $5,000 will have 1 year less to compound, but still she'll have 39 years to compound it by the time she's 65. So we can kind of see how much that's worth. And if we go ahead and we do this for the next 10 years, so the third payment she makes, $5,000 that year, it's got 38 years to grow until she's 65. And we can do this again and again. We can kind of this out 10 times. See, maybe the easiest way to do this is to say, okay, she's going to have this amount plus this amount plus this amount. I don't know if I'm going to have enough room here. Plus this amount. If I do this 10 times, so there's the first 4. Maybe I can kind of like copy and paste this bit at the end here. So 37, 36, 35, 34, 3, 2, 31. Let's see, is that going to be 10 years of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Um, I think that's 10 years worth. And we get to this number, $787,000 by the time she's 65. Try to copy this in here. So this is investor 1. She's saving for 10 years. This amount. And she's getting up to 787,400. It's close. It's 175. This then equals $787,000. So that's true. That's a lot of money. Let's see, if she saved $5,000 a year for 10 years, that means that she's actually only put in $50,000 of her own money. And that 50,000 has grown to close to 800,000, which, good for her. That should be plenty to retire with. How about investor 2? Investor 2 is going to be a little tricky because he's saving $5,000 a year. He's starting at age 35, so his first deposit's going to have only 30 years worth of compounding to grow. So it's going to be similar to this, but instead of having 40 years, I have 30 years. And then the next one's going to have 29 years to grow. And you can see kind of where I'm going with this. And even if he saves for the next 30 years, so the last 5,000 has a single year of compounded interest. Let's see, is this going to be true? Is this going to be less than her 10 years of investing, of saving? Well, if you work it out, or maybe I can copy this. This is 10 years. I don't know if it'll let me do this. It's kind of a long thing here. We're saying we would need kind of like a longer sheet here. But if you go from 1, if you let this start at 30 and go down 30, 29, 20, 28, 27, all the way down to 1, you're still going to end up with less overall than someone who only saved for 10 years, but started 10 years earlier. So here's his last 10 years of investing. So his last 10 years, he put in 50,000 in this last 10 years of his life, or his before his retirement. And his 50,000 over the 5,000 every year for 10 years is only going to grow to 78,000 because it hasn't had much time to actually compound to grow. I think if I kind of copied this all, was able to kind of work through it, maybe I'll pause the video and I'll show you the final. Okay, so I've kind of copied and pasted here and typed in all of the different, his first 30 years, or sorry, his first 10 years worth of investing, saving up is this. His next 10 years of investing is this. And his last 10 years of investing I've broken it. Okay, so this was quite a bit to put in here, but so it looks like the first 10 years of his investments, the first of which only had 30 years to kind of accumulate to compound, his first 10 years ends up compounding up to $364,000. His next 10 compounds to this. His final 10 nets him paltry 78,000. In total, how much is this? Signs here. In total, yeah, he gets up to 611,728. And that's 30 years of saving up $5,000 a year. So, like, how much has he actually put in of his own money? He's put in 5,000 times 30 years. He's put in $150,000, which has grown, substantially. It's grown from of the 150,000 he puts in, it will grow up to 611,000. But compare that to her 50,000 she puts in, and which ends up compounding up to almost 800,000. So yeah, this it seems like it doesn't make sense, but simply starting earlier, starting this compounding process, means that she will see these enormous gains in at the same age that he will. It's going to kind of probably come out really crazy. But yeah. So yes, it is true. So now I've got some scenarios for you to just kind of like multiple choice. Take a look at how much will someone earn who saves the maximum amount possible by law, which is $5,500 each year, into an IRA, which is an individual retirement account. If they do that for 5 years at 8%, and then they retire 20 years later, which of these options will it be? Go ahead and see if you can figure that out. Okay, so if you looked at these options and you said, okay, so they're saving $5,500 each year for 5 years, so there's going to be 5 kind of different deposits going on, which means we will automatically rule this out, this option. And they're retiring 20 years later. So the first payment that they make the first deposit's going to have 20 years. So this is kind of right. This is how much the first deposit will accumulate. So the correct answer here is this one right here, where their first deposit has 20 years to compound. Their second deposit will have 19 years to compound. And if they do this for 5 years, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then this is how much they will have. Which kind of curious. How much is that? Just out of curiosity. About $110,000. How much of that was theirs? 3,500 times 5 years, 27,000. So not too bad. But yeah, let me just write. So what's the explanation here? Their first deposit will grow, will compound for 20 years. Their next deposit will grow or compound 19 years, etc. So I know this is a little confusing maybe to you, but hopefully it makes some sense. How about scenario 4? How much will the same person as in the previous scenario earn if they started saving 10 years earlier? In other words, how much will someone earn who saves the same $5,500 each year for 5 years, 8% interest, and then they retire 30 years later? Take a look at the options and see if you can pick it out. Okay, so if you picked option A here, you are correct. That is the amount that they would have after doing this for 5 years, but starting sooner, starting 10 years sooner. So instead of the first payment having 20 years to compound, here, because they're starting 10 years earlier, it'll have 30 years to compound it. So here, the first deposit has 30 years to compound. Etc. And I'm just out of curiosity, we said that this one, if I click back on my calculator here, for the 5 years that they saved, will end up being 110,000. What about the person who started 10 years earlier? They'll have 238,000, so they'll have more than double the amount. Just for the same amount of money that they've put in, same $5,500 every year for 5 years, but simply starting sooner. Scenario number 5 is a kind of a challenge. I'm going to leave that up to you guys if you feel like it. If you don't want to try this out, I'm just kind of it mentions how the retirement savings program in Illinois is a zero fiscal cost program because it doesn't cost the government any money to run. They're simply the funds will be paid for out of the savings, out of the compounded savings of the participants. So basically, the financial institutions take a cut of that interest rate. They will take 0.75% of the interest rate as their own fee each year. So a simple way to calculate that is to calculate whatever the amount of the account would be based on the interest rate that they're getting, and then calculate it at that interest rate minus 0.75% and compare the difference between the two. I'm going to skip this. If you feel like it, go ahead. Last but not least, create your own scenario. once you start working, how much do you think you'll be able to save each year? How many years will you be able to save that amount? Will you be able to do that for 5 years, for 10 years? What interest rate do you expect? Stock market average, like I said, is about 8%, but something like 5% is more reasonable, it's typical. You can definitely find things that are stable like that. How many years later will you plan to retire? And then based on all of that, how much will you expect to have saved up? Is it going to be enough for you? Or could you even retire earlier if you felt like it? Go ahead and try plugging some of those numbers in, planning for your future. And then I'm just going to kind of jump ahead here. Closing thoughts. Last but not least, in May 2018, Illinois, they went through the legal barriers. They became the first state to implement this government-sponsored retirement plan for all of their employees, or almost all of their employees. Since then, in the last couple of years, 7 other states, including here in Connecticut, have tried to implement their own version of this retirement savings plan that's automatic, comes out of people's paychecks, make sure that everyone is automatically enrolled in some sort of plan so that they can start seeing the effect of this compounded interest decades later when they choose to retire. What are some reasons that you think people might advocate for that plan? Why is this a good plan? And on the flip side, what are some reasons you think people might criticize it? I want to hear your thoughts, and I want you to think about that. And if you feel like it, feel free to check out this article where kind of just gives an update of these other states, including Connecticut. How has this plan fared? Has it succeeded? Have we actually implemented similar plans, a similar plan to Illinois, or has it completely failed? And finally, give me a reflection of today. I mean, how well did you understand the math today? How did this lesson go? Is it confusing? Is it not confusing? Feel free to give me your thoughts. I will post the second day of this week later, either Monday or Tuesday. I just didn't get didn't get a chance to finish it yet. Please leave me a comment. Visit me during my office hours, which have changed. There